guys, welcome to A Safe Place to Learn the Good and the Bad with Alysha. In today's video, I'll be reviewing Chapter 14 of Governing Texas, Building the Future Public Policies for Changing Texas. This is the last chapter for this textbook. Chapter 14 objectives include being able to examine the major issues facing transportation policy in Texas, analyze how immigration and border issues will change Texas in coming years, analyze the challenges facing Texas' system of higher education, and finally understand the challenges facing Texas's water supply. One of the most significant changes since the 19th century is Texas becoming a majority-minority state, meaning Latinos, African Americans, and Asians combined make up a majority of Texas's population. Latinos alone make up almost 40%. This has led to responses from both the state and local communities regarding immigration. Texas has always dealt with immigration issues due to it being a border state, but in more recent years, because of national politics, Texas politicians have focused their attention on border and immigration policy. In 2014, Rick Perry focused his efforts on Operation Strong Safety, a program that invested millions per month to increase security along the border. In 2016, Trump's campaign focused on immigration policy, more specifically in getting undocumented immigrants out and constructing a border wall. Even though immigration remains an issue in Texas, the state is becoming more demographically, economically, and politically diverse. There are three main issues that will likely dominate Texas elections: transportation, demographic change, education, and water. Population growth has led to proposals to make transportation more efficient because it strained the existing infrastructure. State funding for higher education hasn't kept up with the state's population growth, and droughts have made it a challenge to provide safe, clean, and reliable water to residents. The growth of Texas, especially of cities, has led to major issues involving transportation. While there are many problems in transportation policy, there are also many proposed solutions. Political problems with transportation in Texas include the desire for new and improved roads coupled with the opposition to new taxes, public hostility to toll roads, and rural opposition to high-speed rails. Texas has 15.9 million licensed drivers who drive an average of 17,321 miles per year. Driving is the main mode of transportation in Texas, with less than 5% of the population relying on alternative methods like public transit, biking, and walking. While most people agree on the importance of increasing transportation funding, there is no consensus on how the funds would be spent. Texas has a massive and expensive obligation to maintain a wide variety of roads and highways. Texas is responsible for maintaining over 73,000 centerline miles and more than 180,000 lane miles of roadway. Texas roadways are measured in two ways: centerline miles, which is the total length of a road or road segment, and lane miles, the other measure, the center miles traveled, is the average daily amount of traffic on a road multiplied by length in centerline miles. Texas roadways need maintenance and enhanced safety features. 38% of Texas roadways are in poor or fair condition, with 19% of bridges considered structurally deficient or functionally obsolete. Congestion in urban areas is another major issue with Texas roads. Traffic isn't just annoying, it's expensive. A nationwide study of highway congestion found that in Texas metro areas, the total congestion cost between time and fuel came to over $14 billion per year. These issues have become costly to Texas taxpayers. Funding for state roads and highways comes from federal and state sources, with federal sources nearing $21 billion in 2016-2017, and state sources coming from motor fuel taxes and car registration fees. Unfortunately, these sources aren't sufficient to meet the maintenance needs. Heavy trucks are further damaging the roads. The cost of road construction and maintenance is outpacing inflation. And fuel-efficient vehicles mean less fuel purchase, leading to a decrease in revenue from the taxes on motor fuels. Funding for transportation has been increased several times, including by increased appropriations in 2013, an amendment to the Texas Constitution in 2014, allocation of expenditures from the Economic Stabilization Fund, and another constitutional amendment in 2015. Unfortunately, the available supply of money, even with these additional funds, doesn't cut it, and without more taxation or tolls, the congestion will only get worse. With the population expected to reach 45 million by 2040, Texas will need to expand its roads and highways. However, the state has estimated they will need an additional $5 billion annually just to meet current maintenance needs, leaving funding for new roadways a question. Toll roads were seen as an alternative to raising taxes. The roads could be funded through borrowing and then be paid by future tolls. Toll roads in urban areas added lanes and reduced traffic, but as the number of tolls increased, so did backlash, prompting politicians to reject future toll road projects. It's difficult to meet the future needs of Texas roads and highways with opposition to tax increases and opposition to toll roads. The bullet train is a proposed high-speed rail project between Dallas and Houston, relying on billions in private investment and federal loans. The train would go as fast as 205 miles per hour, traveling the 240 miles between Dallas and Houston in 90 minutes with trains every 30 minutes. Supporters argue it will alleviate highway traffic and reduce air travel between the two cities. They also believe it would lead to development in the Dallas-Houston corridor, creating jobs and tax revenue. Those against it argued it will not be profitable and taxpayers will wind up paying the cost. The largest opposition are the landowners who don't want to sell their land. It's argued that the corporate entity for the bullet train, Texas Central Railway, cannot claim eminent domain, so without the landowners selling the land, the right-of-way for the bullet train cannot be obtained. Texas cities are generally large and sprawling and poorly designed for public transportation. For the most part, public transit is utilized in the center of large cities and doesn't extend to the suburbs. Public transit is very limited. The low use of public transit leaves a question as to the value of it as a solution to the increasing traffic congestion problems in the state. Texas's population is rapidly growing through domestic and international immigration, changing the state socially and politically and raising a lot of questions about immigration. 16.4% of the state population was foreign-born in 2015, an increase from 9% in 1990. Foreign-born individuals who have immigrated legally and have been a resident for at least 5 years can become a naturalized citizen through a process involving examinations and demonstration of good moral character. According to the American Immigration Council, 55% of immigrants in Texas are from Mexico, 5% are from India, 4% are from El Salvador, 4% are from Vietnam, 2% are from China, and the others come from other countries. Immigrants in Texas also come from all educational backgrounds. The American Immigration Council estimates that 25% of adult immigrants in the state have a college degree, while almost 40% have less than a high school diploma. All Texans can attend K-12 public education, regardless of immigration status. The Texas DREAM Act allows undocumented immigrants living in Texas to pay in-state tuition rates at public universities. 35% of the total immigrant population in the state is undocumented, making up 6% of the state's population. They are subject to deportation if caught by the Border Patrol or Immigration and Customs Enforcement. The labor force in Texas largely depends on immigrants, with 22% of the state's labor force in 2015 being immigrant workers. Texas immigrants pay billions in sales and property taxes and contribute tens of billions to the Texas economy. Immigrants are also disproportionately business owners in the state, especially in large cities. In the Houston metropolitan area, 42% of business owners are immigrants. In Dallas-Fort Worth, 23%, and in San Antonio, 19%. Most immigrants are immigrating to one of 5 counties: Harris County in Houston, Dallas County, Bexar County in San Antonio, Tarrant County in Fort Worth, and Travis County in Austin. There's been conflict between local officials and state officials on whether to cooperate or not with federal immigration authorities when undocumented immigrants are arrested for violation of local ordinances or state laws. The federal government, through the Border Patrol, is ultimately responsible for securing the borders and regulating trade across the borders. Border Patrol agents line watch to guard against illegal immigration and smuggling of narcotics, as well as operating checkpoints within the U.S. Texas governors, cities, and localities have taken steps to deal with undocumented immigration by deploying the Texas National Guard to the border or by passing local ordinances. Members of the Texas National Guard patrolling the border cannot arrest or apprehend people, but they can notify the Border Patrol of situations requiring their attention. Sheriffs and local law enforcement along the border can't enforce immigration laws either, but they can also notify federal immigration authorities of individuals they apprehend who are in the state illegally or smuggling contraband. Some city and county police departments like Austin refuse to cooperate with federal immigration authorities as far as apprehending illegal immigrants. These cities became known as sanctuary cities, localities where sheriffs have decided not to share information regarding the arrest of undocumented persons with federal immigration authorities. Trump responded by threatening to order his Attorney General and Secretary of Homeland Security to stop federal funding of sanctuary cities. Of the 9 cities threatened, some sued the federal government, and a federal court issued an injunction barring the removal of funding until a court could hear the dispute. In August 2018, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with challenges to the withholding of funds on the West Coast. In the 2017 legislative session, Senate Bill 4, SB 4, was passed enacting penalties for sanctuary cities that refuse to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. Law enforcement would be subject to criminal prosecution, and many saw it as a way to deputize local law enforcement to enforce federal immigration laws in addition to city ordinances and state laws. Opponents feared the law would lead to underreporting of crimes in the state, a lack of cooperation with law enforcement, and racial profiling. The state asked the U.S. District Court in Texas to rule that the law was not in violation of the 4th or 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution so that no one would sue over the law. However, several towns and organizations have filed lawsuits in response to the law. Several border towns and the League of United Latin American Citizens charged that it would lead to racial profiling and have a disparate impact on the state's Latino population, much like Arizona's unconstitutional Show Me Your Papers law. El Paso County and the Texas Civil Rights Project filed a lawsuit in federal court asking for the impending law to be ruled unconstitutional, suggesting it violates the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, as well as the 4th Amendment's protection against unreasonable search and seizures. And it didn't stop there. The American Civil Liberties Union also joined the litigation against the new law. It's likely that the courts will provide rulings on immigration policy between federal, state, and local levels. DACA is an executive order implemented by President Obama which shielded certain undocumented immigrants from deportation if they were enrolled in school, had no criminal records, and were making educational progress. In Texas, nearly 125,000 residents were approved for DACA as of 2016. Trump attempted to rescind the program early in his presidency, but the Supreme Court of the United States ruled it unlawful in 2018. In May 2018, Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton joined 6 other states to sue the federal government, arguing that the program should be declared unconstitutional because President Obama effectively made a new law without congressional approval, that the policy sets a bad precedent, and that it's also unfair to those who have waited in line and immigrated legally. Texas shares 1,254 miles of border with Mexico, making it the first point of crossing for many Mexican, Central, and South American nationals. Recent proposals to curb undocumented immigration over the border include a border wall, a zero-tolerance policy, and an increased presence of the Texas National Guard, each of which has been met with opposition. Texas National Guard troops do not have the authority to apprehend and arrest undocumented immigrants crossing the border or smugglers attempting to traffic narcotics. They can only alert the proper authorities. As a result, the Trump administration's zero-tolerance policy demanding that anyone who attempts to cross the border illegally will be detained and prosecuted, reports arose in 2018 of undocumented children being separated from their parents after being apprehended trying to cross the border into the United States. Supporters of Trump's border wall argued that it is needed to keep smugglers, narcotics, and unauthorized individuals out. Opponents of the wall argue that it would be expensive, disrupt commerce, and antagonize many immigrants. The world economy demands a highly skilled workforce. In order for Texas to compete nationally and internationally, the next generation needs to have the skills and training to succeed. Earning a high school diploma just isn't enough anymore. Higher education is evolving in Texas, being defined by growing enrollment, local needs, and the political support of the University of Texas and Texas A&M University. Over 1.5 million students were enrolled in Texas institutions of higher education in fall of 2017. Higher education is big business in Texas. Funding these institutions is complicated with a balance needed between the state funding and tuition. Aggregated appropriations by the state alone do not capture the policy issues facing higher education in the state. The Republic of Texas set aside 50 acres of land for a university, but very little was done. The Constitution of 1866 provided for the maintenance of a university fund and called upon the legislature to create a publicly supported university. Upon re-entering the Union, Texas became eligible for a grant of federal land the sale of which became the first endowment of the Agricultural and Mechanical College that would become Texas A&M University in 1876, and what became Prairie View A&M University for African American Youth in 1876. The Constitution of 1876 contained many important provisions for the future development of higher education in the state. The Permanent University Fund was created by the state from the proceeds of public lands to finance higher education in the state at selected institutions. The University of Texas and Texas A&M University systems are constitutional creations, while other state colleges and universities are created due to the needs of local communities. A need for primary and secondary teachers led to a rise in normal colleges and community colleges. Sam Houston Normal Institute was the first state-supported teacher training institution in Texas in 1878, and normal colleges were envisioned to be an adjunct to elementary and secondary education in the state. By 1923, 8 normal schools had been established to train teachers throughout Texas. Normal schools were renamed teachers' colleges in 1923. Early community colleges were often church-sponsored and offered first-year and second-year courses. In 1922, the first publicly supported junior college was established in Wichita Falls. Junior colleges were also seen as an extension to local school districts. In 1929, the legislature provided a process for establishing community colleges and supporting them with local tax dollars. In 1941, the state began providing direct funding to community and junior colleges and made the Texas Education Agency the supervising agency. In the 1960s and early 1970s, a lot of new institutions of higher education were established around the state, creating competition for resources. As the demand for higher education increased, so did a haphazard system of creating new institutions of higher learning. 6 university systems were created, organizations in the state that coordinate the activities of various universities, medical schools, and special agencies involved in higher education and research. In 1911, a board of regents of state colleges was created to oversee the operations of normal schools and teaching colleges, later becoming the Texas State University System. The Texas A&M system was created in 1948. The University of Texas system was established in 1950. The University of Houston system was established in 1977. The University of North Texas system was established in 1980. The Texas Tech University system was established in 1946. The Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board, created as the Texas Commission on Higher Education in 1955, is a regulatory body that oversees all public post-secondary education in the state. Its functions are largely regulatory, including monitoring academic program development and reviews, establishing success goals across all universities, working on a standardized Common Core across all public institutions of higher learning, and providing for coordination across universities and community colleges. Higher education in Texas is funded through 3 main sources: formula funding, tuitions and fees, and special items. Formula funding is based on enrollments and semester credit hours. The THECB makes recommendations for formula funding, and the legislature makes the final decision. Tuition and fees are the amounts charged to students for the cost of attending a particular institution. It varies by university or community college because they're set by the respective university system board of regents based on the requests from the university president. Please take a look at the Chapter 11 video that I did for Governing Texas to go further into this topic. Special items are special pieces of legislation passed to support particular programs or building projects for state universities outside normal funding mechanisms. Universities have come to rely on special items to create new programs and to expand others. In 2015, the legislature provided $1.1 billion for 362 special items. A handful of special funds have been established to promote higher education in the state: the Permanent University Fund, the Higher Education Fund, and the National Research University Fund. The Permanent University Fund funds the Texas A&M University and the University of Texas systems, 2/3 going to the University of Texas and 1/3 going to Texas A&M. The PUF endowment is managed by the University of Texas Investment Management Company under the authority of the UT System Board of Regents, with the lands itself being managed by the Land Office. The Available University Fund, or AUF, consists of the revenue from the PUF and is used to guarantee bonds issued by the University of Texas System for various projects. Bonds can benefit all 14 UT system schools, but only to finance capital expenditures. AUF money is also distributed to benefit A&M and UT system institutions. AUF money can be used for operational expenses of UT Austin and the UT system administration, but not of the other UT system institutions. Constitutional amendments passed in 1984 and 1993 established a second fund for higher education for universities, health-related institutions, and the Texas State Technical College that were not included in the PUF. The Higher Education Fund is supported by general revenue monies to finance public higher education for non-PUF institutions. By 2009, a decision was made by the legislature to repurpose the HEF permanent endowment to the newly established National Research University Fund. In recent years, a special joint interim committee on higher education formula funding was established to report back to the legislature on overhauling the funding of higher education. In 2000, the THECB drafted a 15-year plan called Closing the Gaps by 2015. The goal was finding ways to serve the higher education needs of all Texans, particularly the ethnic and racial minorities who are underrepresented in higher education. In 2015, a new 15-year strategic plan called 60 by 30 Tex was released by the THECB, which seeks to create a well-educated and highly skilled generation of Texas graduates, but fails to outline how schools should accomplish this goal. There are 4 goals. The first goal is the number of Texans between age 25 and 34 with a certificate or degree will rise from 41% in 2015 to 60% in 2030. The next goal is the number of individuals with a higher education degree or certificate will rise from 311,340 in 2015 to 550,000 in 2030. The next goal is all graduates by 2030 will have completed programs with identified marketable skills. And finally, by 2030, undergraduate loan debt will not exceed 60% of first-year wages for graduates of public institutions. The financial constraints of Texas colleges and universities pose considerable challenges. The challenge today is less regulatory and more political. Reducing state funding and increasing tuition and fees may have worked in the past, but with growing student debt, significant increases in tuition and fees are no longer politically acceptable. The legislature needs to step up and find a better way to finance higher education because what we've been doing has not been working. Access to water is necessary for a thriving economy and growing urban population. Texans rely on aquifers, rivers, and reservoirs, with consumption projected to increase and access to water projected to decrease. There are 15 major river basins and 8 coastal basins across the state, as well as 9 major and 21 minor aquifers. When the Texas Board of Water Engineers was established in 1913, there were only 8 major reservoirs in the state. By 1950, there were 53, and today there are 188. Texas's diverse geography makes coherent water policy difficult to formulate. The water-related issues along the Gulf Coast, a subtropical and humid area, are different from those in the High Plains Panhandle, a semi-arid savanna. There are also regions that experience severe droughts and flooding, though the reservoirs help to more effectively distribute water during these times. Texas law recognizes several classes of water rights, making it a politically charged matter. In 1967, the state legislature passed the Water Rights Adjudication Act, merging various water rights doctrines into a unified water permit system governed by the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. It requires individuals seeking water rights to file a claim before using the water. A complex administrative and judicial process was put into place that basically grants certificates to holders of water rights. Groundwater law regarding water flowing or percolating underground, differs significantly from surface water law. Groundwater law is governed by the law of capture, which grants ownership to the first person to capture water by pumping it out of the ground and using it. This can be controversial as it does not account for other owners' interests or for future water needs. In 1949, the state legislature passed the Texas Groundwater Act, which created water districts to manage groundwater supply. Today, there are 99 groundwater districts in Texas with varying powers. The groundwater districts can develop regulations to protect the water supply, including rules that may restrict pumping, require well permits, delineate well spacing, and establish rates of water use. Various agencies govern water planning, including drainage districts created in 1905, conservation and reclamation districts created in 1917, and water control and improvement districts created in 1925. From 1950 to 1956, Texas experienced its worst drought in history, only to be ended by severe rain that created terrible flooding. All but one of Texas's counties were a disaster area. In the 1960s, the state created new agencies to address water issues. In 1977, the three major state water agencies were combined to create the Texas Department of Water Resources, whose job was to develop Texas's water resources, maintain the quality of water, and assure an equitable distribution of water rights. Sunset legislation in 1985 reorganized this agency into two new agencies, a new Texas Water Commission, and a new version of the TWDB. Today, the Texas Water Development Board is the state's primary water planning and financing agency. Enforcement of the state's environmental regulations is left to the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. The TWDB is made up of a 6-member board serving staggered 6-year terms and coming from a different part of the state. Their responsibilities include supporting the development of 16 regional water plans, developing a state water plan every 5 years, providing financial assistance to local governments for water supply and waste management projects, flood protection and control projects, agricultural water conservation projects, and the creation of groundwater districts, administering the Texas Water Bank, which facilitates the transfer, sale, and lease of water and water rights throughout the state, administering the Texas Water Trust, which holds water rights for environmental flow maintenance purposes, and collecting data for the state's freshwater needs. The 2012 State Water Plan focused on the importance of conservation and emphasized the importance of expanding and developing available surface water throughout Texas. The plan calls for the building of 26 new major reservoirs by 2060 and new pipeline infrastructure from existing sources to new points of use. The plan's groundwater strategies include the expansion of production by drilling more wells or building treatment plants for water quality. Cost is not the only challenge facing water policymakers. Some environmental groups in the state are opposed to further expansion of the reservoir system, arguing that the cost to the ecosystem far outweigh the advantages provided by more water. On the other hand, some property owners, particularly in West Texas, are opposed to any new conservation restrictions put upon them by the state. In 2012, the Texas Supreme Court ruled on the Edwards Aquifer Authority v. Burrell Day and Joel McDaniel case, which has important implications for future attempts to regulate water use in Texas, particularly in areas that rely heavily upon aquifers. The case involved two farmers who had applied to the Edwards Aquifer Authority for permission to pump 700 acre-feet per year of water. The court sided with the farmers, ruling that using historical use as criteria for a permit to pump water was a departure from the Texas Water Code. Justice Hecht wrote, "Unquestionably, the state is empowered to regulate groundwater production, but groundwater in place is owned by the landowner on the basis of oil and gas law." Meaning Texas regulatory authorities had the power to reasonably regulate in the public interest the use of water drawn from an aquifer, but they may have to pay the property owners with a stake in that water any damages that are incurred by the regulation. The ruling raised many questions, including who would be in charge of water policy. In 2013, voters approved a constitutional amendment to create a $2 billion water fund. The bulk of the fund came from a one-time transfer of money from the Rainy Day Fund to the State Water Implementation Fund of Texas. The basic idea behind this water initiative is that SWIFT projects would generate revenue that would go into another account that would be used to fund more water projects. Proposals for projects to be funded by SWIFT and SWIRFT would come from regional water planning groups and could include such things as building new reservoirs, fixing pipes, and developing groundwater. The authorizing legislation established a separate committee to oversee how SWIFT and SWIRFT funds are managed. The committee would be appointed by the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor and be composed of the Comptroller, 3 state representatives, and 3 state senators. In this chapter, we learned about 4 of the most important policy areas in Texas politics. Addressing transportation problems, immigration and border issues, higher education policy, and water needs is important for Texas's future. Unfortunately, these don't seem to be issues to the people of Texas, except for the Republicans who are especially concerned about immigration and border control. We need political leaders to take a stand and mobilize voters on these issues, or we're going to end up uneducated and thirsty in traffic in the years to come. Let's review the chapter objectives. The first was examine the major issues facing transportation policy in Texas. Texas transportation policy primarily involves maintaining and expanding Texas's roads and highways and designing a public transportation system that can lessen the state's reliance on automobiles. The major problems facing transportation in Texas are developing a politically acceptable funding system for roads and highways and developing a public transportation system that would be used by a reasonable proportion of commuters in Texas's major metropolitan areas. Analyze how immigration and border issues will change Texas in the coming years. Because of its long border with Mexico, Texas has always been familiar with immigrants from Mexico and Central America. In recent years, the issue of border security has taken center stage, as has the issue of how to respond to the state's large population of undocumented immigrants. Texas has passed laws taking aim at sanctuary cities which have refused to cooperate with federal immigration authorities. In addition, Texas has a large population of DACA recipients who are undocumented individuals brought to the United States at a very young age. Analyze the challenges facing Texas's system of higher education. Higher education is an important link between an expanding and diversifying population and a rapidly transforming economy. Businesses in the modern world economy demand a highly skilled workforce. For Texas to compete nationally and internationally and thrive in an ever-changing high-tech economy, the next generation of Texans must have the necessary advanced skills and training. Finding new ways to finance higher education across the state's many universities and colleges will be difficult. Understand the challenges facing Texas's water supply. A looming threat to Texas's future economic development is access to fresh water. Over the next 50 years, water consumption is expected to vastly increase, while existing supplies may decrease. Current water law in Texas adds complexity to the development of rational water policies for the state. Alright guys, that is a wrap on governing Texas. I hope you learned something new today and have found these videos helpful. Please remember to like and subscribe down below so you can join me in reviewing other textbooks. I hope you have a great day. Thanks. Bye.